So, welcome back to 3rd Age Reforged, and once again this is the city of MISTRAND, only this time it's not going to be a sort of just two teams on the field. There's actually going to be several, and in a composition I'm actually not sure of. I know that I think there's one team of two, and then there are three teams with just a single player in them. But regardless, things are going to get a little bit complicated here, which is why I kind of wanted to do it, because matches like this, something that has been discussed recently is that the game has sort of reached a point now, particularly with sort of the arrival of 0.96 and how the balancing has gone, that there has been a sort of very clear meta that has been defined. So generally speaking, a lot of the battles that we show tend to run in quite similar ways, with very little in the way of exceptions to that rule. So doing slightly different types of battles is something which is hopefully going to be more of a thing moving forward, especially seeing as there is potentially a new game mode, which is on the game type, I should say, which is on the horizon, which should be premiering on the official channel at some point soon. And I do have a variant of that myself, which I will be doing at some point after it has been on the official channel. So do keep an eye out for that. The link to that will be in the description below, of course. But we'll go through the army compositions now, which will be it'll be a little bit difficult for me to define what the actual teams are. But I do know, for example, that one of the teams of one is going to be the player that sent this to me. And it's going to be another fight that was sent to me by Master Blaster, so again, big thank you to him, and he's going to be playing as Lothlórien. So he's got some Lothlórien spears at the front, backed up with some Lothlórien archers. Of course, Lothlórien are capable of dealing very high amounts of damage in melee and at range. This is something which they probably have over the other elves in terms of how good they are, especially in melee at any rate. I mean, Merc would probably outdamage them at range, and obviously Linden are a factor with their javelins as well. Galathrun Riders are one of the strongest horse arch units in the game, however they are very, very effective with their multiple HP, very tough to bring down, and of course that elven expertise at range as well. Some Sylvan Staff Masters with the armour upgrade, of course. They are one of the melee tar pits in the game. They are not quite as effective at this as the Barrow Wights are, but they do have a bit of AP in melee, and while their base attack is quite low, we've seen in the past from the Nurad Footmen that doesn't often matter. So against armoured units they can do a decent amount of damage, and even against unarmoured units, like high skill units like Swordmasters, the Swordmasters of Karnan for example, the Sylvan Staff Masters will still be able to hold them up for a decent amount of time with their high melee skill. And then there are some Sindar Blade Masters with the armour upgrade. Obviously they can hide, but other than that they're a little bit worse than the Lothlórien Swordmasters, and he's spread his army quite wide, which might be a bit of a mistake if all of the enemies come from at once. Some Lothlórien Blades, which are one of the most effective sword and board units you can get and mass up in the game. And we've got some Maithail Asgellan as well, obviously some Javelins, often a very important part of the Lothlórien composition, because they do lack a little bit in terms of their anti-cavalry capabilities, which isn't a big problem on a map like this with a lot of choke points. But still, the Spear-Javelin combination is really their most effective anti-cavalry unit on foot by quite a long way, outside of the Karas Galadhon's Guardians. And then we've got some more Lothlórien archers and blades, and then just over here, again you can see most of his troops are in loose formation. He's sort of adopting a wait and see approach by the looks of things. Some spears, and then the slightly more attack focused axemen. They've got a little less defense than the Lothlórien blades, but they are still very good. Oh, look at that 2D rock there that pivots with the camera. The price I pay, I mean, Reshade really, it does take a bit of an... I don't know what it is recently that has made like Reshade almost like aids to the game. It really hasn't been too pleasant to try and get Reshade to work, but there's nothing much I can really do about that. There's Sindar archers back here and the Galathrun nobles as well, so both of the high tier Lothlórien archers are on the field. And then down here, the final portion of the Lothlórien army, we have Sindar Blade Masters, Sylvan Staff Masters and Sylvan Rangers, all hidden, perhaps hoping to pounce upon an ill-judged attack. Now up here, I think we can kind of try and see who's facing off against who based on how they've deployed, and I believe this is going to be one of the teams of one as well. So we've got Harry Shearer 590 playing as Erebor. Erebor have got their Ironfoot crossbows, of course they do. Obviously it's one of the central pillars to their armies oftentimes because of those AP missiles. Very good against enemy cavalry at zoning them out, and of course if you can get into a good position they can be devastating against infantry blobs as well. Erebor Legionaries and some Ironfoot pikemen in there as well, so that's again going to be a pretty decent front line against the elves. The Legionaries will still struggle against some of the higher tier Lothlórien infantry that they are presumably going to be fighting against, but they will at least put up more of a fight than the Ironfoot Warriors, which would have been the only other choice in this situation to back up the pikes. Some Ironfoot Axe Throwers as well, so again, provided they can get close to the front line, they are going to be very necessary to try and whittle down the Lothlórien forces if that is indeed who they are going after. The Highborns of Erebor, who don't have the general in their unit, but they are of course a multiple HP infantry unit, they will be able to stand against the Lothlórien infantry. The Axe Guard are AP, but again, against the Elves, that's a little bit more questionable as to whether that will pay off in the long run. Merc Cavalry, of course, so some melee cavalry. Lothlórien have actually only brought one unit of cavalry, and that is their Horse Archers, so it'll be interesting to see how the Erebor cavalry works in the interior of this settlement as well. Some Ironfoot War Goats, and they are now, I think, just shock cavalry, the Ironfoot War Goats. They need to get moving and try and find themselves into a good position early, I think. Otherwise, they'll end up bottled up. The Blacklocks are a devastating unit in the right position. They are essentially a crossbow ranger hybrid. Also a sort of hybrid with a sort of pretty good multiple HP infantry unit as well. So they really have everything you need. But they can be a little bit vulnerable to cavalry charges and the like, provided they don't get their shots off before the cavalry hits them. The General is going to be in a unit of Obsidian Guard, which we don't see enough of because they are a very interesting unit as far as the Dwarves go. They are a dual-wielding unit, so they trade their AP in for a lot more melee skill. And that may be why you don't see them so much, because they will still lose to the equivalent Elven units, and that might be one of the only situations in which you would expect to see them. But even so, it'll be interesting to see how they work out against potential human foes in this environment. And then some Ironfoot crossbows up here, and based on their position I can assume that they are going to get ready to face off against the army which is over here, which is Hugin, who is playing as Umbar, and he's got some Corsair infantry with the armour upgrades, backed up by some Númenórean shield guards, so an interesting front line there. Not a lot of AP damage here, which might be a problem against the Dwarves, but Umbar do have that elsewhere, of course. Naru and Aru Royal Guard with our Pharazon back there in the unit. And obviously, as far as a sort of spear archer hybrid goes, they can be very effective at zoning out cavalry and at plugging away at enemy infantry lines. Corsair archers obviously cheap, but obviously very bad at taking arrow fire individually, but there are enough of them that they can weather that storm pretty effectively. Some Númenórean shield guard over here, and then the front line, which is where most of the quality is. Castamir's Legion, of course, I've praised these guys a lot in the past because of how strong they are on the front line. Very, very effective front line force, and they're backed up by some Belagir halberds, and there probably are some hidden units, more from Umbar than Erebor at any rate. You can actually see that there are some units down here guarding the potential rear approach, some Belagir footmen, but there are probably some Castamir's Rangers hidden around here in addition to some crossbow Corsairs, often a very integral part of an Umbar force, particularly when you're in a situation like this with a lot of choke points. And then finally we will go on to the other two armies over here. I'm fairly sure that these two are on the same team because of how close their deployment zones were. We have Eclipse 2500 playing as the Realm Ladros. He's got some Norotino warriors at the front here, backed up by some Eldarenwe Heru Quinga, and then just in behind we have the full bulk of his infantry force, which seems intent on moving because he hasn't bothered to deploy them, which is commendable. You know, you don't need to deploy your forces if you plan on moving them forward anyway. Eldar Makar, we've got some Imladris sentries, all the Eldarenwe are here as well, the Eldarenwe Haru Hatal, and there are some other units in there as well, the Haru Masil. There are also the Gwyth Iarthand, which are of course multiple HP spears, look at that 2D tree, and Imladris Guardians over here as well, obviously pretty much the equivalent of the Lothlórien blades across the way, and a couple more units of Eldarenwe, no, not the Eldarenwe, the Eldar Quinga. I was going to say Haru Quinga then, but no matter. And then the final force, which I'm sure is allied to Imladris, because you cannot have a sort of free-for-all with 5 teams. We have Tundra's Fox playing as Cardlan, so he's got the Miniscirithalan archers here at the front, decent archer force in the front line, several layers of stakes, a lot of stakes actually, so no cavalry is going to want to charge the Cardlan force head on at all. Some sharpshooters as well, so obviously he's got the crossbows with the archers, and then of course the armour upgraded Menotar Romen Guardians, very, very effective. And then we have the civilians over here, and then there's a lot of Greenwatch garrison units to pad out the army. Obviously very cheap. I would imagine that Imladris and Cardlan had to make cutbacks where the other armies didn't have to because of their they have each other to rely on. Dunedain captains, and then the Wardens of Tirn Gorthad and the Tharbad Warhammers. So they do still have a lot of elites, but they do still have a lot of chaff in here as well. So without further ado, let's begin. I might actually make a bit of a cut before the battle is joined here, because there's probably going to be a lot of manoeuvring around, especially seeing as it's a 38,000 frame battle. So yeah, we'll rejoin when the action actually starts. So it wasn't as long as I was fearing, and indeed Umbar are going up against the Dwarves here, the Corsair archers, just zoning out the initial advances of the Dwarves, and just seeing over here you can see that the Ironfoot crossbows were targeted. They will of course be able to stand up relatively easily to this lower tier archer fire, but you still don't want them to get skirmished down too much. I have said in the past that you really want to kill the vast bulk of the crossbowmen if you do intend to go after them, but even so, keeping those crossbows away from the Umbar front line is going to be very important for Higuin or Hugin to do. But also we can see over here that Lothlórien are advancing into the city. Lothlórien and Cardland did sort of retreat from one another, and that does mean that primarily we will be fighting within the city, so there won't be much action outside of it. That doesn't surprise me too much because of Lothlórien and Cardland's overall lack of cavalry in this situation. But Imladris have also moved forward as well, and we saw it in the previous battle that I showed on MISTRAND. This area over here was the final stand for the defenders, so it looks as though Imladris is not going to make it a repeat of that. They are going to move forward, and it will be interesting here because Umbar, I think, finds themselves in the position which is least desirable. Now, these Corsair archers are being chased down by the Merc cavalry, but they won't get too much done. They are melee cavalry, and they're already shaken. They've got low morale here, and going into the Umbar front line, a lot of these elites are around. If those Númenórean shield guard get a hold of them, they will be destroyed. Would have been probably better to actually use the war goats in that situation with their higher charge, but as I was saying, I think Umbar have probably got the least desirable position because Cardland are going to come up this road here and presumably attack Umbar in the rear. Imladris are going to come down through here as well because it's really they can't advance any further into the city without going past this Umbar front line, so they will probably be engaging Umbar there. And then of course there are the dwarves who are here and have two angles that they can attack Umbar from, so Umbar finds themselves in the middle here with no real escape. They could try and sort of dive down this road over here, but I think that would just lead them back to the dwarves in a roundabout way. Well, no, actually it doesn't, so it does actually allow them to circumvent the problem. We'll see if the Umbar player sort of takes advantage of that escape route he's been given. This does also work against the dwarves in a way though, because Lothlórien, if they want to advance into the city, have to go through the dwarves as well, so it will be interesting to see how this works out. This does of course give license to Umbar and the dwarves to dig in a little bit more, which both factions are very good at doing. Their defensive credentials are very high of course, but even so, the right amount of pressure from the elves on both sides could really inflict some heavy casualties. And then there is of course Cardland, who probably have got the... They can decide quite a lot here because they are of course sort of on the periphery of the city over here. They can just sort of wait. Now they do only have one way in that they could choose from at this point. If they wanted to go back around to the other side of the city, it would take them a long time to get there with all of their units on foot. And of course our archers still firing away. And so far it's going to be a very cagey skirmish. I would imagine that this is probably going to continue for a little while, purely because no one really wants to commit. In this sort of situation, no one wants to overly commit because they could find themselves surrounded and destroyed quickly. And no one really wants that in a situation like this. And the choke pointy nature of this often sort of engenders a little bit of cautious play as well. Although Eclipse is going to be moving forward with some Eldar Makai. In fact, he's moving forward with a decent chunk of his forces. It will be interesting to see what he does here. I doubt anyone will want to enter an alliance with Imladris purely because they already have a teammate in Cardland, I believe. So it might be worth Umbar's time to just fall back at this point. To just sort of go into this sort of area back here. And maybe that would convince Imladris to then go after the dwarves instead. The dwarves need to be careful as well. So far though, Lothlórien doesn't seem too eager to advance either. Lothlórien archers and the Maethil Asgellans, they're just sort of adopting a wait and see approach, which based on the spawn is understandable. So far this crossroads is where the action is happening. Imladris are here now though, and this essentially is going to pose the question to Umbar. What do you do now? And the Eldar Quinga are moving forwards. Depending on who they go for, it might actually be Imladris and Umbar on the same team. Although based on the angle in which they're standing... No, they're not going for one another. Going to be a severe case of egg on my face if it turns out Umbar and Imladris were the allies all along. That would have been a really weird spawn point if that was the case, so I can't really see that being true. Númenórean Lancers though from Umbar, so some units that were previously hidden to me. Corsair Blackguards as well. Obviously those javelins are going to be very effective. If I were Umbar though, I wouldn't really trust Imladris if it is the case that Cardland and Imladris are on the same team, because Cardland are advancing up the hill. They only have one way they can go, and Umbar is in the way. They do have those Corsair Blackguards, however, which will make it difficult for Cardland to move forward, especially seeing as most of Cardland's infantry is this lower tier stuff. mean, Greenwatch Garrison spearmen are really not going to make much of a dent on the Umbar, even the basic Umbar infantry, because of their extremely low attack. I think they do have 1 attack. They're a good tar pit at dealing with ranged firepower, but they are not very good at inflicting casualties on the enemy. So if they really wanted to get through here, they would probably need to use something a little bit more heavy duty, whether that be the crossbows or perhaps the Tharbad warhammers. Meanwhile, what's going on over here? The mercenary cavalry is routing, and again, they did come out all on their lonesome, and they got far too close to the Elven front lines. I mean, they aren't shock cavalry, they're not going to achieve the sort of results which I think Harry Shearer was hoping for in this situation. Meanwhile, Lothlórien's still just waiting there. And the dwarves are actually even more bottled up than Umbar, because there really is no escape for them at this point. They are sort of within this little L shape over here. They have this little bit of raised terrain, but there's no getting out of this sort of section of city that they have decided to dig themselves into. Not that that's a bad thing, but it always helps to have a way out that you can get some of your units to escape through. Some warlords from Umbar as well, so good to see a knight unit. Meanwhile, yes, and indeed, now the elves are facing off against Umbar, so my prediction was true. But, you know, this Elven Arrowfire will not bother the Castamir's Legion all that much. I imagine that what Imladris are trying to do is thin out the ranks of the Halberds, which the AP damage is useful against the cream of Imladris' infantry force. But Umbar are in a bit of a tight spot here. Their cavalry could prove to be very useful, but I don't know. I think that Imladris and Cardlem, with the narrowness of the engagement points, they're probably going to be alright. So maybe it would be a good idea to sort of send the cavalry around the houses and maybe leave them in reserve so possibly they can escape. Meanwhile, it looks as though Lothlórien are now moving in on the dwarves, seeing which way the wind is blowing for Umbar. The Ironfoot Wargoats did not move in. Their lack of a shield probably makes that attack a little bit not exactly the most thrilling of engagements for them if they went into all of this ranged firepower. 2 units of Maetha Ilazgelen would also hurt them quite a lot. But Lothlórien are able to approach this fight at their leisure. Erebor do not have the long-range skirmishers to force Lothlórien into a quick engagement that they would regret. So really Erebor can do nothing except wait and see, especially seeing as Lothlórien could technically just sit back and use all of their ammunition on the Erebor front line. It wouldn't be the most efficient use of their archers, but they could do it, and they would not suffer any reprisal for that. It's still just a skirmish fight so far, though. Corsair archers firing into the Imladris army. Now the Corsair infantry, not the Corsair infantry, the Castamir's Legion should defeat the Eldar Makar 1-to-1, which again, most of the elves, a lot of the time when they bring a lot of these sort of infantry units like the Eldar Makar or the Harlingen infantry, they are quite reliant on the fact that this infantry will be able to go 1-to-1 and beat equivalent units from other factions. When they can't do that, they are a little bit less impressive. And the Castamir's Legion is certainly a unit that the Eldar Makar won't do so well against, but there are other units in this army that more than make up for that. The Imladris Guardians in particular should be able to defeat the Castamir's Legion 1-against-1. Now, I just noticed what is going on over here. The Blacklock Engineers are firing right down the line of Umbar, and this has devastated their front line already. The armour-piercing, body-piercing projectiles has flattened almost, I think it has actually, almost killed off an entire unit of Castamir's Legion, and it's also digging into these Belagaya halberds as well. And this is the problem with having a very densely packed front line. It's very tough to break down, of course, but as soon as someone manages to fire right along the line like that, especially the Blacklock Engineers are probably the most devastating unit when they get into that position. So the Dwarves seeing an opportunity and taking it. Although Umbar are probably not the most threatening force at this point in time. They might just be hastening the ability for Cardlem and Imladris to engage with them. But the Blacklock Engineers are now being engaged by the Corsair archers, but the damage has already been done. The Blacklock Engineers have certainly already paid for themselves by devastating Umbar's front line in such a fashion. Now the Númenórean Lancers are coming forward, but they won't get a clean charge off because their own men are blocking the way. And I'm actually surprised the Blacklocks are staying in melee, although their AP hammers will help them a little bit. Meanwhile, I think Lothlórien are also moving forward, albeit it is going to be a point-blank firing line. We can see that the Ironfoot crossbows are the target of this, so all of the Lothlórien archers are trying to bring down the Dwarven crossbowman. And this is the problem that the Dwarves have. They really don't have the ranged firepower to deal with Lothlórien. And honestly, this is why I would probably counter-attack into these archers at this point. You really have no choice. You've dug your own grave in a way. there is no escape, and the best you can do is try and engage Lothlórien, but even then Lothlórien would have they would be on the outside of the crescent moon, and that is always a bad thing, especially when you're facing off against. If the elves are able to get a surround up on you, you're always going to be in trouble with that. Meanwhile, the Eldar Makar are now moving forward, catching out this unit of Corsair archers. The Umbar player, I think, has been caught off guard, and they are certainly the ones bearing the brunt of the situation as it unfolds. And now we can see that this front line over here is also taking some damage, and you can see that the Tharbad Warhammers are getting into the front line, and against a unit like the Belagaya Footmen, the Tharbad Warhammers will do extremely well. The spears will not be able to deal enough damage to them in return. And there are some Umbar units up on this hill over here. The crossbow Corsairs revealed themselves, of course, and they will be able to do decent amounts of damage provided they're not firing their bolts into this dirt verge. And I think they are, but they are arcing their shots somewhat, and I think they are actually trying to skirmish with the Cardland forces, and that's a huge mistake if they're doing that, because the crossbow Corsairs, they're never going to beat all of these archers in a skirmish fight. At this point you should either pull them back or focus your fire on the Tharbad Warhammers, and if you get rid of the Tharbad Warhammers, honestly, Cardland would still struggle to break through this front line. They do have a lot of these Greenwatch Garrison footmen, but it would be slow going for them, and at this point I think that's all Umbar can hope for, because over here in the middle you can see that chaos is starting to take hold. We have the Númenórean Lancers just sort of hanging out, but Imladris, with all the damage that the Dwarven player did to the Umbar front line, it's fair to say that Umbar won't be lasting too much longer. The Imladris sentries are on the front line, backing up the Eldar Makar, and also there's the Eldarenwe Haru Masil over here, so the Castamir's Legion is strong, but they're not strong enough to deal with this many Imladris elites. Those Corsair Blackguards also revealing themselves. They're actually going down to try and reinforce the Cardland front, but yeah. Unfortunately for Umbar, I think that they probably should have seen the position they were in earlier, and they should have noticed that they were in a very undesirable part of the city considering where everyone was converging, and they should have tried to look for a way out. The other player who was in a bit of a tight spot was the Dwarves, and they still are. The Maetha Ilaz Gelen are now throwing their javelins right into this front line. The Dwarven front line is still holding pretty firmly in the face of these point-blank javelin throws, and also you can see that the Ironfoot crossbows are still very much alive. The Ironfoot axe throw is now taking a lot of damage as well. You can see that despite the fact the elves are inflicting a lot of damage here onto the Dwarven forces, a lot of them are still alive.
They have lost half their men.
And Erebor and Khazad-dûm, both Dwarven factions, are very good at absorbing this amount of arrow fire, but eventually this pressure is going to tell, because of course the Elven archers are pretty good at melee once they're out of ammunition, and Lothlórien are going to have a numbers advantage over Erebor pretty substantially, especially seeing as Erebor does still need to cover this approach as well, and there's a lot of men just sort of stationed here just in case Imladris decides to attack them. So it's very likely at this point that Imladris and Cardolan will be facing off against Lothlórien. I don't see how Umbar and Erebor can dig their way out of this, especially Umbar. Their front line is collapsing. Of course, their Blackguards trying their best to inflict a lot of casualties on Imladris, and you can see that Imladris is trying to get to the aid of their ally. Cardland are still fighting uphill, and they do still have a lot of lower tiers which will be taking damage against Umbar's front line on the hill. The Castamir's Legion have done very well to hold this front line, however, and defeat no longer seems like a certainty, so they've done well, but ultimately the fact that their two flanks have collapsed is not going to bode well for them, especially now that the Imladris Guardians are on hand as well. And yeah, Imladris has... I think that fire from the Blacklock Engineers, sort of breaking the Umbar front line in half, essentially, really did make things very easy for Imladris as they rolled over the Umbar front line with very little to slow them down. And of course their ally Cardland is slowly but surely chugging up the hill, and now they're going to receive some support from the rear. These Eldarenwe Haru Hatal coming in. There are some Númenórean Shield Guard on this front line, but they will certainly not be enough. Cardland have got a lot of armor-piercing missiles as well in reserve. At this point, I think it would be worthwhile for Erebor and Lothlórien to reconsider their engagement, because with how well Imladris and Cardland, the team of two, have come out of this initial engagement, they're going to have to start thinking about how they're going to face off against two armies at once. But it doesn't look as though Lothlórien is too concerned about that. They have softened up the Dwarven front line as much as they feel is necessary, and now the Sylvan Staffmasters and the Sylvan Axemen, or the Lothlórien Axes, have moved in, although the Erebor Legionaries still doing very well, but ultimately the sheer weight of numbers from the elves, which is something you don't hear an awful lot, should be enough to break the dwarven front line, and then they will be in trouble. Because the dwarves have got nowhere to run at this point, unless perhaps they use their war goats to clatter into these Imladris archers. At this point you need to start trying to think about stabbing someone in the back to stay alive, but the dwarves, I think they're far too static. I think the dwarves and Umbar have certainly made some pretty substantial mistakes so far. You need to see which way the wind is blowing in a free-for-all if you want to achieve victory, and I don't think either one of these factions has paid enough attention to the battle around them. And unfortunately they found themselves probably in the least desirable starting positions, all things considered, but even so I think they probably should have done better than they've ended up doing. So this is going to be the end for Umbar, unless they've managed to save their warlords, which is possible. What's going on down here? Is this the warlords? Well, some routing Corsair archers at the very least. And there goes our Pharazon. The elves doing well. Let's see how Lothlórien are getting on this front line, because they need to dispense with the dwarves as efficiently as possible. If they don't, they'll just be overwhelmed by Imladris and Cardlin relatively easily. Now, with the sheer force of numbers, the elves are starting to pick apart the dwarven legions, and the pikes are not going to be enough to keep this front line in check, although they did certainly help a lot. Pikemen can be very good against the elves if they don't get skirmished down. The Sindar archers, all of the archer line is still ready to fire. And Lothlórien do still have a decent amount in reserve, but they will need to play very smartly if they want to defeat this force, because Imladris and Cardlin will have a definite numbers advantage over them. And you really don't want Imladris to have a numbers advantage over you if you can help it. Of all the elven factions, they are probably the ones that rely on their quality the most. Meanwhile, Umbar are still fighting away. The Númenórean Shield Guard are of course lot morale, so they will stand and fight to the death. But it is going to prove to be more of an annoyance than anything else, and you can see that the rest of Cardlin's forces are down there. Actually, the Warlords of Umbar are all the way over there, so there must have been a way that they escaped. And Umbar cavalry force is still alive then. You know, Númenórean Lancers and Warlords, so is there a way down from here? There must be. I doubt they've pushed their way through all of that Cardlin infantry, but they must have found a route out of the city somewhere. So Umbar are still technically alive, and if they keep that cavalry for the end and all of the forces are a little bit more depleted, that could be just what the single teams need, although at this point Imladris once again going to be making the most of their archers. Blacklock engineers are here. They're just stood out in front though. When you see something like this, I would highly question whether or not the player is even in the game still. And I really hope that Master Blaster has not sent me a game where someone crashed so early that their army is just a sitting duck. I would really not appreciate that of him, and I've learnt to expect better from him really, but we'll see. These Ironfoot pikes are about to be destroyed. A front line of sorts has been sort of set up, but again you can sort of see that it is disjointed, and these Obsidian Guard are just sort of standing there like lemons on the top of the hill when they could really be used elsewhere. So yeah, I think it's safe to say the Arable player has crashed, and that displeases me a lot. Meanwhile, there are still some Umbar forces over here. The Umbar player doing their best to sort of slow up the Imladris forces. But yeah, the rest of the Cardlin infantry force is going to slowly but surely advance up the hill. There's still a lot of this fight to go, and while Umbar has largely been destroyed, and Erebor will almost certainly follow them, especially without an active commander. I think Lothlórien have put themselves into a bit of a tight position here. They're going to be struggling against an army full of two, and even if they do secure the support of those two Umbar cavalry units, it's going to be difficult to use them to their full effectiveness as well. There are some Ironfoot warriors over here. This is still a tough front line to deal with, but with the way things have been going, Lothlórien will probably just keep pushing through the dwarves, and honestly they need to use these dwarven units to try and whittle down Imladris as much as possible, otherwise they too will be digging their own grave, because they cannot hope to defeat this amount of forces from Imladris and Cardlin all on their lonesome. It just won't happen. And now Lothlórien are pulling back. Well, we will at least see the Eldarenwe Heru Masil charge in here on their own, which is a little bit of a strange one. I mean, again, this is just fighting an army without its leader, which means it's not going to move. Yeah, I'm really disappointed by that. I will say that if ever there is a game, it doesn't matter how strange or weird it ends up being or interesting, if there is a player that crashes this early and just is a non-factor, please don't send it to me, because it's pointless. I mean, I will still do this one because it does still have the potential to be quite interesting and strange, but nowhere near as much as it would be if all of the players were still participating. And if for nothing else, this battle deserves to go up just for that message alone. Unless the Dwarven player suddenly springs to life, but based on how inactive his forces appear to be, I doubt that's the case. Meanwhile, Cardland have moved they've moved some of their forces up here. They are still keeping a lot of these forces back here, I assume, in reserve, just in case Lothlórien rallies and manages to bust through. Now, at this point, I wonder how this fight is going to proceed. Still a long way in this fight to go. We are around the halfway point now. But Imladris are going to need to be the ones to advance through here, because Lothlórien certainly won't if they've got a single brain cell. And yeah, I mean, a lot of these forces can potentially be a bit of a problem. I mean, something like the Axe Guard, they won't get their charge off though. The Obsidian Guard is still just sort of up there. What are they doing? They're still just taunting up there. That's fun. I kind of want the Dwarves to win this now. They would be the first player to crash in the first third to win such a thing, especially considering their position. It would be highly amusing. I'm not sure what Eclipse is doing here. Very strange idea indeed to send the Gwathi Arthand up on their own against this front line. Because really the Dwarven front line is still very thick and you do still need a decent amount of force to overcome it. So I'm not entirely sure what he's doing here, unless he thinks he can maybe punch a hole through it, and seeing as how the player is no longer with us, he can then sort of roll up the line and maybe reduce the amount of casualties he takes. But honestly, the Gwathi Arthand are not the sort of unit you really want to send in as a sacrificial lamb. I suppose he doesn't really have much else though. He could have waited for Cardland to do it though. Most curious. Well, you can see these Lothlórien forces here up against the vacant Dwarven units. It could end up being a complete mosh pit here on this crossroads. We shall see. I think it's time we kicked it up to ×2 speed actually. That is the problem with games like this. They do tend to have a lot of periods of inactivity where people are moving around or doing something like this, and you can see the Gwathi Arthand are not really having the best of times against the Dwarven front line. Not really sure what Eclipse hoped to achieve with that advance. If he wanted to push through, he certainly should have pushed up the Eldarenwe Heru Tal as well, maybe even another unit of infantry. It's not like the Dwarven player would have been able to retaliate at all in this sort of situation. Cardland's army is still coming up. Umbar are still alive, remember, with that cavalry. Quite where they are, I'm unsure. What's going on over here? Crossbow Corsairs trying to get around the back. I mean, I'm not really sure what Lothlórien and Umbar are doing. If either one of them hopes to be victorious, they shouldn't really be attacking one another, but this has been a game of extremely questionable decisions so far. I'm not entirely sure what any of the players are doing, to be honest with you. Early on, Imladris and Cardland did very well. To be fair, Cardland hasn't really done anything wrong. They've only advanced up a hill. Imladris did okay earlier as well, but this was a very strange decision. Blacklock engineers are now being engaged upon by the Tharbad Warhammers and some civilians. And they'll be able to give as good as they get in melee, although you'd still expect the Tharbad Warhammers and their AP to tell in the end. Especially seeing as the Blacklocks have already taken some damage. Well, there isn't really much I can comment on at this point in time, with this fight continuing. Slowly but surely it looks like the elves are making inroads, but this wave-based approach from Eclipse on this one section of line is very weird. Blacklocks have been dealt with, however. Hopefully this long period of essentially dead rubber at this point in time, because they are just fighting what is essentially a corpse. And Lothlórien are quite rightly just waiting here. Although Umbar is now taking revenge for the loss of their crossbows, and this honestly might decide the fight. Because if Umbar continues to harass Lothlórien's rear, this fight is over. Imladris and Cardland will easily roll over the remaining forces, and that will be very disappointing. This will probably go down as one of the most disappointing games that had such a promising start that I've ever covered, if that does turn out to be the case. Those Warlords of Umbar are shaken, however. We need to be careful. I mean, they are charging into a unit that's got decent melee defense and attack, so they're taking casualties every time, and they're also taking sustained ranged fire from the Galatharan Riders and the Lothlórien Archers. This should be the end of them, though. And that is going to be the end of them. So again, Umbar not really in a position to challenge Lothlórien here. What's going on over here, though? Menotar Romen Guardians. I'm still on ×2 speed, because technically this is still just completely worthless section of the battle. It's really only when Lothlórien starts to engage Cardland and Imladris that things will actually get good. Hopefully. Menotar Romen Guardians are, I assume, going to get like right up into this Dwarven line's face and then just fire. Eldarenway Harry Masil moving in as well. So Imladris is still just plugging away at this one section of line, and still the dwarves are holding. It does show how good a Dwarven front line is, but to be fair, Imladris has not really done the right thing here at all. Noratino warriors, and I think at this point Lothlórien is going to move in and challenge what remains of the Erebor forces, just so we can finally get the final battle underway. Otherwise we would be here all day. These Noratino warriors have managed to slip in behind the static Dwarven lines and are now dealing with what remains of the Ironfoot crossbows, and this should give them the gap they need to then roll up the line. And finally the elves have what they want. They have managed to push through the Dwarven lines, but they've taken a decent chunk of casualties for doing it. The rest of the Cardland forces are moving forwards. Still got the Dunedain captains left alive as well. Honestly, if Imladris and Cardland end up losing this fight, it will be because of this. This was wasteful. And, you know, they were 2 versus 1 against Lothlórien. I still think they should win, though. Cardland have got enough left in reserve, surely, to still win. It would be exceedingly amusing if the dwarves managed to win, if they burnt each other out and then this one unit of Obsidian Guard was sufficient to win the battle. It would be one of the weirdest battles I've ever covered then, rather than one of the worst. Lothlórien axes. Presumably over here to overwhelm the Axe Guard. What remains over here are the Highborns, although they've just been stomped into the ground as well. There's Merc cavalrymen over there as well. So, we finally have the elves surrounding the Dwarven line, which is going to bring about their destruction. There are still a lot of decent units that they've got here. The Imladris sentries in particular will be difficult to break down for Lothlórien from the front. They've got no pikes of their own on the field today. And there are the Wardens of Tyr and Gorthard. I would imagine this is probably going to go in the direction of Imladris and Cardland still. And Lothlórien do still have some very good quality units themselves. A lot of these standard Lothlórien troops. Sylvan Rangers as well. You know, Rangers could be invaluable in a situation like this. Right, come on. You know, at this point, honestly, if the Rangers start firing, which I imagine they probably are going to be, the Lothlórien Archers are already firing, and the Sylvan Rangers have got the perfect blob here to fire into. They need to make the most of this while they still can. Of course, this wouldn't be happening. They wouldn't have that nice elevated ground if the Dwarven player was still here with his Obsidian Guard. Menotar Romen Guardians returning skirmish fire. arcing the shots, those crossbows isn't the best thing, but the Minotaur have already scored a decent amount of kills, albeit on a static Dwarven line so far. What are those Sylvan Rangers doing? They need to start firing. Looks as though they're going to. There we go. Right, let's turn that back down to 1 speed. This is going to be it. I'm actually quite surprised that the forces of Imladris and Cardland are not sending some of their forces to flank around. What's going on over here? There's a big blob of red over here. Ah, that's more of Cardland's forces that they presumably sent marching around the map. Yeah, so forget what I just said. Tundra's Fox is on it. And at this point, Lothlórien find themselves in exactly the same position that the Dwarves did. They have occupied this sort of L-shaped road with the slight elevated ground, and they are going to find themselves surrounded. Albeit that sort of Cardland expeditionary force is not comprised of the most elite Cardland soldiers, but even so it does still mean that they won't be able to focus on one front line. Divide and conquer. We watch Garrison Spearmen. There's also some Thieves of Tharbad, which, to give them their due, they've got decent melee skill, although they are also finding themselves the target of the Lothlórien riders. There's a decent amount of troops though. The Miniscirith and Sharpshooters, if they can get into a good position with those crossbows. And they should have a decent angle as well if Lothlórien takes the bait and tries to camp out on top of this hill. Although they can't go too far up the hill because the Obsidian Guard is still there. I was being a little bit harsh when I said this was one of the worst battles I've covered, but even so it could have been so much better if the Dwarven player hadn't crashed. Meanwhile, this Lothlórien front line's looking a little thin on the ground. I can't imagine that they'll stand up well to a full Cardland push. And now, Imladris sentries out in front, that is bold. The Sylvan Rangers, they have ammunition. They might have already used the vast bulk of their ammunition on the Dwarves, which, I mean, that's a bit of karma because really they didn't need to use all that skirmish firepower on the Dwarves, all things considered, when they crashed. And this does allow, of course, the Imladris sentries to poke these war goats to death at their leisure. The war goats do look a little bit dopey. So yeah, this is still... It's been a weirdly slow-paced battle, this one. Still, those Obsidian Guard are still there. They're one of the strongest units left on the field, so... Whoever wins this engagement needs to hope they've got enough to deal with the Obsidian Guard. Now, they should, because I imagine that Imladris and Cardland are going to be just fine. There are still a lot of these forces over here trying to bring down the cavalry, but there's a lot of manpower for that. A bit wasteful. They need to form up a front line here because Cardland are on the way. But the main threat is certainly here from the front, where both Imladris and Cardland are going to be advancing. Now this is a strong Lothlórien front line. They've got, their archers which are out of ammo, but primarily the Lothlórien blades, axes, and spearmen represent a difficult front line to break down, especially with the Sindar archers and Galathrun nobles still alive. But I don't think Lothlórien will have enough, surely not. I'd be very surprised if they did. It would certainly be a testament to how damaging they can be in melee if they ended up winning this. But there's still 3 units of Imladris Guardians, and they are the match of the Lothlórien blades. And they're having to divide their forces with Cardland approaching from this side as well. Meanwhile, Eldar Quinga facing off against the Rangers in melee. Now the Eldar Quinga, of course the High Elven archers to be out of ammunition, just being sent for what is a sacrificial pawn. Eldar Enway Haru Quinga also moving in to engage the Lothlórien archers, again very similar units, although the Eldar Enway are slightly better, but you can only have one of them. But Imladris are spreading themselves maybe a little bit thin, but ultimately I don't think it will matter too much in the end. If we have a look over here, Cardland are almost certainly overwhelming. Well, actually no, the bandits over here are being overwhelmed by spears and blade masters. It's over here, I think, where... To be fair, actually, this expeditionary Lothlórien force is actually winning. But they are still being distracted from the front line, and it is over here where I think they will ultimately start to fall down. I'd be very surprised if Lothlórien were able to dig their way out of this. I'm not sure if it will be deserved or not. Wardens of Tir Gorthad are moving forward. Miniscirith and archers are idle. seeing more of those pikemen come to the front line to assist will certainly be good for them. There's a lot of these Greenwatch Garrison spears, which of course are going to get absolutely massacred by the Lothlórien forces. In a way, if Lothlórien ends up winning this frontline engagement, that would be kind of good, because then they would have to face the Obsidian Guard, which, depending on what they have left, they might not be able to accomplish. Imladris Guardians moving over here. More Imladris Guardians. They're sending more and more resource. Well, the Imladris Guardians, I was actually kind of expecting them to try and go around and attack the Lothlórien forces from the rear, but they are actually trying to bail out the Cardland flanking force, which is an interesting move. Or they might just be trying to keep these forces locked down for a little bit longer, because a lot of the bandits are starting to lose stomach for the fight. But it is this engagement which is all important, and the Galathran nobles are going to be really difficult to cut their way through, as well as the Sindar archers. I don't know. That one bit of wasteful play might be enough to tilt this fight, although with the Wardens of Gorthad over here, Imladris and Cardland are certainly winning, and you have to imagine that when Lothlórien's front line starts to come apart, they don't have anything in reserve that can really save them. Lothlórien are doing their best to try and win this fight over here. The Galathran nobles could, well, the Galathran riders I should say, could still be a factor, but they are horse archers, so they don't have the most devastating charge in the world. It's an interesting frontline fight that's going on. The Eldrannaway Heru Quinga breaking through. Miniscarithlin Sharpshoots is also trying to push through, just being used as infantry at this point, giving them more weight on the front line. There are also the Dunedain captains over here, so a lot of the quality, particularly from Cardland, is focused on this line over here. And at this point, you can see that some of Lothlórien's forces are starting to lose stomach for the fight. They are winning on this flank, however, so it's one flank each, essentially, but what does worry me slightly for Lothlórien is the amount of pikes that Cardland still has available. If they form up, they should still be relatively okay. Now this is a tragedy in the making. The Obsidian Guard are unfortunately going to be shot firing squad style by these Miniscarithlin sharpshooters. It's a bit of a shame, but I guess a Dwarven AFK victory was too much to hope for. Just seen that fight going on over there. Are they going to fire? Doesn't look like it. I don't have time to stick around and wait for them to decide what they're going to do. These Galathran riders need to be careful of the stakes. If they ran into them, that would be absolutely horrid for them. They are still an interesting unit, though. They are getting dangerously close to the Wardens of Gorthad there, though. If they get skewered, then that will be the final nail in Lothlórien's coffin, you can imagine. Some more Sylvan Rangers coming back. Do they still have ammunition, or are they just a unit that's returned from routing? Well, regardless, they are going to win over here. But I think that this was always going to be a sacrificial force over here. There was only really one unit of crossbows and the Thieves of Tharbad, which were any good. And ultimately, a good move to draw off this amount of Lothlórien forces, because it has allowed them to crush the side of the Lothlórien line. I wonder if anyone has sort of ran anything to the outside of the map, because I can't imagine this is going to take 8,000 frames at this point to deal with. And in fact, Lothlórien are retreating, showing their backs to the enemy. This kind of is the final nail in the coffin for me, hoping Lothlórien go on to lose this fight. Here we have the final little bit of engagement going on here with the Imladris Guardians. I don't know what Lothlórien hope they can accomplish. I mean, I guess to form up a front line which is a little bit more structured. But at this point I think it's probably too late, because if they engage sort of front side on with these forces, then the Imladris sentries and the Wardens of Gorthad and the Menotar Romen Guardians, those polearm units, are just going to form phalanx and slowly but surely rip you apart. So I don't really see the merits to running away like this. Your fate is already sealed. The least you can do is face it like a man. But I guess this is a typical Elven player doing what they do best and running away. I like a bit of an inflammatory comment. So they are going to move forwards. The Obsidian Guard are being just sort of poked to death by the Menotar Roman Guardians, those AP halberds. This fight is being drawn out a little bit longer. Lothlórien have now turned back around, hoping to sort of spread the forces of Imladris and Cardland out a little bit, and if they allow this to happen, then Imladris and Cardland deserve to lose. Imladris charge forward, but without the support of a lot of these Cardland units, which they could live to regret, because this at the moment is Lothlórien's only hope. If they can somehow try and focus down individual units and quickly deal with them, but even then it's a tall order for these Lothlórien forces to really affect the outcome of this fight. Most of Imladris' forces have fallen though. Imladris getting in and around the Lothlórien forces, the Sylvan Staff Masters. Their AP will help them a little bit as they twirl around with their staffs. Ironfoot Spears routing some Lothlórien axes back there. This is the strong point of the Lothlórien line at this point in time. Where are the Sindar Archers? Here they are, the Galathrun Nobles. They're being targeted by all the archers, which is unsurprising because they are by far and away the strongest Lothlórien unit left alive at this point. They still have their Sindar Archers somewhere, I believe. The Galathrun Nobles charging into those Greenwatch Garrison footmen, and then they will be engaged upon by the Wardens of Tir Gorthar. They're a fantastic looking pike unit. I was going to get a cheeky screenshot there, but I decided against it. Apologies for that. Meanwhile, Galathrun Nobles trying their best, but at this point Lothlórien, I think their fate was probably sealed some time ago. Although having said that, no way. These Minotaur Roman Guardians, look at that wall texture. Trying to deal with this one Merc Cavalry that's still alive. The Obsidian Guard are still alive, so we might yet still see an AFK victory. That would be the most hilarious thing I think I've ever witnessed in this game. I still think that the amount of pikes that Cardland are sort of bringing to the table here alongside the Imladris sentries is going to be too much for Lothlórien. They don't have an answer to this, they don't have any ranged units left. And unless they can get in and around them, which is not impossible, but still unlikely, these Sylvan Staff Masters taking some point-blank fire from the archers. There's also the Minas Tirith sharpshooters with their AP missiles. There are the Sindar archers with their dual-wielding. They too still taking continuous losses. Despite their best efforts, Lothlórien are still going to lose this fight. And in the end, it was, you know, in a 2v1v1v1, if you don't make any sort of pacts to try and bring down the team of two, of course they're going to win. You know, which is why I'm very surprised that Lothlórien, Erebor and Umbar just continue to tear each other apart when they knew that there were bigger fish to fry. So quite frankly, they deserved to lose this. Little deals are often made in free-for-all battles, but it doesn't seem like there were any made in this one. Very strange. All of these pikes are going to be the match winner, I think. The Wardens of Tir Gorthar really propping up their army. And that means that even the Obsidian Guard won't be able to stand against the Phalanx because they will be outranged. And they've already taken a decent amount of damage to the Minotaur Roman Guardians. We're probably going to go back for another bite at the Obsidian Guard. Just making sure there's nothing left in the settlement. There is a unit over here of Wathlo trackers, so yeah, Cardland and the primary force still alive. Lothlórien spears routing, so this is going to be it, you would imagine. Lothlórien keep trying to fall back and making new lines, but it's really it's a lost cause at this point. Doom Line captains are still in pretty good health as well. Obviously a multiple HP swordsman unit, similar in vein to the Haven Guard nowadays. More Minas Tirith and sharpshooters, so you'd imagine this is pretty much going to be the end of Lothlórien. At least I hope they don't try and run away and draw this out any longer than it needs to be. Another unit routed and broken. So technically the Dwarven player did finish ahead of Umbar and Lothlórien, although Umbar might still have a unit of cavalry left alive. I didn't see the Númenórean Lancers make their move, but they probably got slaughtered in the same way that the Warlords did, ultimately. what's going on now. It's just this unit of Obsidian Guard, right? They're still taunting away. They're eager. Oh, they're going to be shot to death by the crossbows. Well, I say that. Ooh. Go back down to 1 speed. We never really got to see what the Obsidian Guard are capable of, unfortunately. Player crashed before we were ever able to see them do something. Which is a shame, because they can be good against some of the Elven units. It's only really the very elite Elven units which can outperform them. Victory seems certain for them, but not against this many forces, you would imagine. Probably at this point we're still just waiting for the Lothlórien general to fall. And he's in here somewhere. Indeed, we still have the... There's Haldir. It's all over for him. It's a shame that the archers are the ones that are primarily on the front line surrounding him, so he's probably still going to last quite some time with their measly attack. There goes the Elven General, though, at the hands of the Obsidian Guard. Not Elrond. Come on, just get one of the Dunedain captains into a battle with him. That should be enough to finish him off. Not the Gwathlo trackers, they're even worse. Well, this could take all day. And at this point I think the Obsidian Guard are done for. Who will die first, Haldir or Dane, in his pink armour? I wonder why he's got pink armour. Is that some sort of visual glitch or something? Or was that intentional? Because I swear he doesn't have pink armour really, does he? I mean, I'm not that big on Lord of the Rings lore, but if King Dane has pink armour, then surely, you know, it must be impossible to take Tolkien seriously. The Obsidian Guardsmen are still fighting hard, though. They are mostly against sort of more base tier units, admittedly. What are they doing over here? Haldir is still just... Well, now we've got some Dunedain captains going up against him, so this should be enough if they actually, you know, swing their sword at him. He actually kills one of them. Come on, Haldir, just die. That's all you're good for. He's not getting stun locked here, which is interesting, considering he is getting hit. What's going on with the Obsidian Guard? How well are they doing? Well, they now have been surrounded. No, well, there goes Haldir. So, Lothlórien, unfortunately, they did lose out to the AFK Dwarves. And yeah, this is going to be the end, so we'll just turn it up to 6 times speed and end the torment of these poor stunties. Very weird battle.
General lies dead.
Not entirely in a good way either. It showed a lot of promise. I think this format is something which could be pretty good on the right map, and this is a good map for it. But unfortunately, due to some of the players not really performing as they could have, I feel as though that certainly hurt them. Master Blaster may have got the most kills, but he certainly didn't help his own case here by continuing to attack the Dwarves. He knew he would always be outnumbered by Cardlin and Imladris heavily, and he kind of dug his own grave, really. So in spite of getting the most kills, I would not give him the MVP. Instead, I would give the MVP to Tundra's Fox, because he didn't really make any noticeable mistakes, and also he made the decision to send some of his infantry around. They were always going to be sacrificial, but they divided the Lothlórien forces and kind of secured the victory. We'll have a look at what the Lothlórien kill count was like, though. So Sylvan Rangers getting a lot. Obviously, Rangers tend to get a lot in this sort of situation. Galatharim Riders doing very well, of course, and Sindar Blademasters also doing pretty well. So all of those near the 200 mark. I will say for future reference, this battle ended up being pretty decent, all things considered. But if anyone sends me a battle, please make sure that no one crashes in the early stages of it, because it really did kind of ruin it overall. The Dwarven player, if he had been present, would have made life much more difficult for both Imladris and Cardlin and Lothlórien, and it would have made for a much more interesting fight with the Dwarven player still active in the middle of the two of them. He might have even been able to sort of back up and let it turn into a 3-way fight in this sort of corner area over here. But as it was a bit disappointing, and it leaves a bit of a sour taste in the mouth at the end of this fight. So please, in the future, it doesn't matter how well you do, how many kills you personally get in the replay that you want me to show, do not send me a replay in which someone crashes in the early stages, because I will not be happy. This will be the only time that I won't lose my temper about it. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this for what it was. A little bit of a weird one, but nonetheless, the next one I might be doing a siege on the Grey Havens, and of course there is that new game mode to look forward to as well, which I'll be showcasing after the official channel does it. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.